and welcome to our statistical computing seminars. Today we're going to be talking about arrays in SAS. Now the notes that we're going to be using for today's seminar as well as the SAS program are available on our website, and that is www.ats.ucla.edu/stat. From here, let's click on SAS. And from here, we can click on Classes and Seminars. And then from here, we can click on Using Arrays in SAS. So this brings us to the notes that we're going to be using for today. And if you click right here, you can download the SAS program that we're going to be using. So you may be asking yourself, why would I use arrays in SAS? Well, you use them for data management purposes, and the real thing with arrays is to make your life easier, particularly when you have repetitive things that you have to do over and over and over again, such as recoding variables, applying math computations to many variables, computing new variables, collapsing over variables. You get the idea. Now, you do all this stuff in a data step, and for example, you might use if-then statements to recode a variable. And so if you've got 2 or 3 of these to write out, that's no big deal. But what happens if you have 200 or 300 of them to do, or in some cases 2,000 or 3,000? Well, certainly you don't want to be coding 100 or 1,000 if-then statements, and so you'll look for an easier way of accomplishing your task, and that's the whole point behind the arrays. So let's scroll down here on our web page and see what we've got going on here. Alrighty. We're going to start out here with recoding variables. And the first thing we're going to do is input our little example data set. So we have data, and we're going to call this data set FAMINC for family incomes. And we're going to input a family ID and then the variables FAMINC1 through FAMINC12. So we have 3 families here, and then their incomes for each of the 12 months of the year. So that's the little data set that we're going to be working with, at least here in the beginning. Now we were talking about recoding using if-then, so let's see what we might do. Let's scroll down here just a little bit, and we see here that we're doing some if-then recoding. So we are creating a new data set that we're calling Recode Manual, and we're using as our set data set the FAMINC data that we just read in up here. And what are we doing here? Well, if these variables are less than 3,000, then they get recoded into missing. And so we're cycling through each of the 12 months and saying, well, is the value for this month less than 3,000? Okay, if that's true, then we're going to set it to missing, and so on and so on. And you do this over again, and in this case, you might really think, well, I can cut and paste and, do this lickety-split. But, if you're anything like me or some of my friends, well, occasionally you make mistakes with that cut and paste, and you can end up with some pretty funny answers. And those cut and paste errors, they're often not so easy to find. So let's think about some other ways that we might accomplish this very same task. Now, before we get to that, let's actually get SAS going and run these data in SAS. So I have SAS running down here. I'll click on this to bring it up. And I'm just going to run this little thing here. It doesn't make much difference. It's just going to make my output look a little prettier for us. And so here's our data set that we saw on the web page. I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to come down here. I've got a proc print here. I just have this to make sure that the data get read in correctly and everything works as I expect it to. So I've got all that highlighted. I'm going to click here on my running person to submit my program. There it goes, and there's our output. So we see that we have our family ID, and then the income for the first month, the income for the second month, and so on. So everything looks good. Let's come back down here to our program, and scrolling down just a little bit, let's have a look at this data step that we saw on the web page. So here we're creating the new data set. Here's our set, and then here are our 12 if-then statements, and then again a proc print to see how things actually worked out. So I'm just going to highlight all of this, and again click on my running person to submit my program, and there we go. So we can see here that when FAMINC fell below 3,000, we have a missing value. Here it's below 3,000 and we have a missing value. And here corresponds to here. So we see that the program worked just the way we wanted to. Now let's see if we can't find a slightly easier way of doing things. So we'll come back to our program here and let's scroll down some. So scrolling, here we go. We're recoding variables using the array. Okay, well we have here data recode array, so this is our new data set that we are creating. Again, we're going to base it on the FAMINC data set, our little data set that we ran in at the very beginning. So these, look just the same as before. Here's something new. We have the array statement. Okay, we start an array or create an array using an array statement. Okay, well that makes some sense. That's not so hard. And we're going to have to name our array. We have to give it a name so, we have something to call it. And we're going to call it AFAMINC. A for array, FAMINC, because that's what it refers to. Now, there's nothing magical about this name. You could have named it Scooby-Doo, ABCD, anything that grabs your fancy. We try and pick names that are meaningful to us, but, you can call it whatever you want. Here in parentheses, we have the number of elements that are going to be in the array, and I'll explain that in just a second, but that's what this number is. And finally here, we're going to tell SAS what elements or what variables we want in our array. And so in our case, we have FAMINC 1 through FAMINC 12. Now you notice that there are 12 variables here, which corresponds, it's exactly this 12 right here. So that's why this is 12. Now I want to point out that AFAMINC is not a variable. So if you do a proc print on this data set right here, like we're going to do right down here in just a moment, you are not going to see this variable listed anywhere in the data set. And no matter how you try and look at the data set, you're never going to see this variable because in fact it's not a variable. Rather, it's just a name for a collection of elements, and these are the elements in there. So that's what this really is, okay? So, here we go. After we have our array set up, you usually find a do loop, okay? And this is the way that SAS cycles through the elements of the array and does that repetitive stuff that we saw above. So it just loops through each one. So we have do. We have I. Now I is a variable. We called it I probably for index, but you could call it anything that you wanted to call it. Sometimes it makes sense to actually give this a variable name. Other times you just use a letter. Whatever. And we set it equal to 1 to 12. And we do this because we want to start at 1 and end at 12. And that corresponds to the variables we see right here. We start with FAMINC 1 and we end with FAMINC 12. So that's 1 to 12, and this is the 1 to 12 right here. Now we have our if. And so we say if AFAMINC I, okay, so this is this I right here, is less than 3,000, then AFAMINC I equals missing. Okay, so that's what that is. Now let me scroll up here just a little bit. I'll probably scroll down a little too far to begin with. Okay, so here's this if, and it corresponds right here to this. Here's your less than 3,000, your less than 3,000, your then, FAMINC equals missing, FAMINC equals missing. And so this I right here are just these numbers here. And so each time through the loop, SAS changes this from 1 to 2 to 3 and does the same thing over and over again. Okay, we have an end statement here. Every time you have a do, you have to end it with an end. These two things have to go together or you get an error message. Here we have drop I, so we're just dropping the variable that we called I. We're doing this just because we don't need it. It's an extraneous variable at this point. And if you didn't have this statement here, of course your program would run just fine. You'd just have this extra variable. So that's basically the whole shooting match there, so why don't we stop talking and start running something. I'm going to highlight this program here. I'll click on my running person, and there we go. So this is the proc print from the manual way of doing things, and this is the proc print from our arrays that we just ran. And you will see that we get exactly the same results. So everything worked out just as we expected, and we have now a simple little program to do this over and over again. Okay, so if you imagine that instead of 12 months, what if you had this over the course of, I don't know, say 5 years worth of data, and you had to do this 60 times? Well, you can see how this is going to get real long if you do it the manual way. You do it 60 times here. Oh, well, you change this to 60, you change this to 60, you change this to 60, and you're ready to go. So that's one of the valuable things about arrays. Okay, let's move on some, shall we? Alrighty, I'm scrolling down some in the program, and why don't we go back over here to our web page here to get an introduction to this next section. So scrolling down here again, that's all the stuff that we saw before. And now we're applying the same math computation to many variables at a time. And we are reversing the items on a scale here. Now, if you are familiar with psychological research, if you've ever participated in a psych study or basically almost any kind of survey, you'll notice that occasionally the ends of the scale get flipped back and forth. So maybe on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 is sometimes bad and 5 is good, and other times it's the other way around and 1 is good and 5 is bad. And they do this so that they can find out if people are really actually paying attention to what they're doing, or if they're just going right down that column of 4s and just kind of checking off 4 absent-mindedly. So, that's a good thing to do, make sure people are actually paying attention. But when it comes to analyzing the data, well, you want one to mean the same thing throughout all of the questions, especially if you need to do some sort of composite or anything like that. You can't have one meaning one thing, for this variable and it meaning something completely different for another variable. It's not going to work. So what you do is you reverse the items. So you say, well, how do I do that? Well, here we have input a baby data set, and items 1, 2, 3, and 4 need to be reverse coded. Okay, so we have input our data here, and now we have our little array data step here, and I'll just explain it here off the web page, and then we'll go ahead and run it in SAS. So we have our data statement. We're all familiar with this. We're going to call this data set score underscore array 1. We are going to use score as the set data set. It's just this data set right up here that we create. And now we have our array statement. So we're going to say array. We call our array item. You could have called it anything that you wanted. We just picked that name. We say that it has 4 elements in it, and those elements are item 1 through item 4. Okay, well, that's okay. That's pretty easy. So let's move on here. We have our do loop here. So we're going to do I 1 to 4. Again, you could have called I anything you wanted, A, B, C, puppy, kitty, your favorite name, whatever. Doesn't make any difference. We're going to cycle through 4 times, and we're going to do item I equals -1 times item I. So this is the reverse part of it. Multiplying it by -1 is going to reverse the signs on everything. Now, if you remember back to our previous example, we had used, I believe, a different kind of bracket here for this subscripting here. And the truth is, you can use square brackets, you can use round brackets, or you can use curly brackets. All 3 of them, are perfectly fine. The only rule is that you have to close with the same kind that you opened with. So if I open with a square bracket here, I have to use a square bracket to close here. I can't use, say like a round bracket, because then, SAS will get confused. But other than that, you can use whatever kind of bracket you want there. So that's that. Here's our end. It corresponds to our do. We always have to have an end with our do's. And then we have the run, which ends our data step. So let's go back over here to our program. And we see that our program looks amazingly like the web page. Imagine that. So we're going to input our little baby data set here, and we're going to do a little proc print to see that everything goes in just as we want. So let's click on our running person here. And there we go. So we have 3 cases and the 4 variables, and everything looks just right. So let's come back to our program here, and we're ready to run this data step with our array in it. And this is just what we saw on the web page a second ago. So I'm going to highlight all this and again click on our running person. And there we go. And you can see that when it was a -2 in the original data set, now it's a +2. The -1 has become a +1, and so forth. And so everything worked out. Now you'll notice that there was no drop statement in that last program, and so SAS left I in there for us. And you'll look here at I and you say, why does I equal 5? And we come back to our program and you say, but wait a minute. I said 1 to 4. How did I get up to 5? Well, let's think about what SAS is really doing here. SAS comes along here and it gets to this array statement. It says, oh, okay, I'll go do this. And it comes up to the do loop and it says, oh, start with 1. Okay, well, I can do that. And so I put in item 1 here. And then I go ahead and I do my math, and that's fine. And I come to my end and I say, oh, okay, I'll go back up to the top. Well, now I equals 2. Okay, well, you go through here. Now I equals 2, I equals 2. You do your math. Come back here, loop up again. I equals 3. Come and do your math. Come up here. I equals 4. Everything's fine. Come through, do your math. Cycle up here, and now I equals 5. And SAS says, whoops, supposed to stop at 4. 5 is out of range. And then it comes out of the do loop and processes any more statements that if we had, we would have put them right here. There's nothing there, and so SAS says, okay, I'm done with my data step, and waits for your next command. And so that's why I equals 5 and not 4, because it goes back up to the top to evaluate, and when it finds that it's come out of this range, then it comes out of the do loop and moves on. So that's the logic there. Alrighty, how about if we scroll down and look at the next example, shall we? Okay, what we got going here. Computing new variables. Oh, this is a fun one. Alright, web page, let's go back there. Okay, let's scroll down some. Alright, here we are. We're in dreamland today, and we're dreaming that somehow we ended up in a 10% tax bracket. And before we wake up from our dream, we're going to show you 2 ways to compute your taxes here. Okay, so that's our story. So we have a data set here. We're going to call it Tax Manual, and we're going to base it again on our familiar FAMINC data set. And so we're going to say that this new variable that we're going to call TaxInc1 equals FAMINC1 times 0.1. Okay, that's fine, and then we do this for the next month, and then the next month, and the next month, and so on, and so we end up with 12 new variables. Okay, so let's come back over here to our program, click on this, and let's actually just run this, okay? So we'll highlight all this, and we'll come over here and click on the running person to submit our program, and there we go. So here are the original FAMINC variables for our 3 families, and then here are those TaxInc variables that we just created. Okay, so far so good. Back to the program, let's move on. So now we're going to do the same thing, only we're going to use arrays. So here we have our data statement. We're going to call this data set tax array. Set fam inc. Okay, we're familiar with this part. We have array here. We're going to call it afam inc. We say that it has 12 elements, and these are the 12 elements. Okay, and these, we'll note, are existing variables. They're variables that are already in the data set. Now here's the new part. We have a second array statement, and this array statement actually creates the new tax inc variables that we want to create in our new data set. So here we go. Array statement, name of array. We called it a tax inc. Again, you can call it whatever you want. We say that this new array has 12 elements in it, and that those 12 elements should be called tax inc 1 through tax inc 12. Now I want to point out to you that the syntax of this between the array that creates the new variables and the array that's working with the existing variables, they're exactly the same. Okay, there's no specification difference in the syntax that would immediately jump out to you saying, oh, this is working with old variables, these are working with new variables. Okay, so don't look for that kind of differentiation here because it's not there. Alright, so we come down to our do loop. We're going to do month instead of I. We've changed it. We've given it the name month. And this makes sense because month 1, month 2, month 3, this actually has meaning for us. And we're going to say we're going to do this from 1 to 12 again. So here we're going to have a tax inc month, this is this right here, equals a fam inc, the old variable, again month, so this is corresponding here, times our point 1. We have the end statement that goes with the do, and then the run. Now let's scroll up here just a little bit, and we'll do the corresponding here with the manual way of doing things. So here is the a tax inc, which is this tax inc right here. Month, well, those are the month numbers right here, and this is what's cycling through. And we say equals, right here, here's the equals. Fam inc, well, there's the fam inc. Month, here's the month that cycles through, times 0.1 times 0.1. So you can see the very close correspondence between the manual way of doing things and this line here within the do loop. And this is how you know it's doing exactly the same thing. Okay. Why don't we just run this and look at our output? Again, I do a proc print to have a look-see, make sure everything went okay. We'll highlight and click on our running person. And there we go. And we see that we get exactly the same thing using the arrays that we did when we did it the manual way. Alrighty, so that is the first part here. We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we are going to be collapsing over variables.